To gut your own ties, you're going to need a zero clearance insert. I made this out of 1/2-inch plywood to match the cutout in the table, and then added these pads to bring it exactly level with the top of the table. The first time you use it, you lower the blade all the way, put in the insert, turn the saw on, and run it up through the insert. After that, it just slides right over the blade. I'm using a basswood board I bought from the scrap pieces bins at the lumber store. Adjust to the fence for the height of the tie. For S scale, that's 7/64 of an inch. You can just try to get close and then rip one piece. They always shoot out of the saw. Check the thickness, and if it's okay, just start ripping the board. You're probably not going to be able to use a blade guard, so be careful with those fingers. Now I'm going to use a smaller saw. I made this fence out of scraps of wood. It is always set at the tie width, 9/64 for S scale. Some of my friends have had trouble with the Dremel saw. This one is quite a bit more powerful with a sewing machine motor. It has a good blade guard, but you still have to be pretty careful. After making a ton of fine sawdust for scenery, I'm going to chop the ties to length. This is pretty straightforward with the chopper. That pad, by the way, is way better than the old Masonite board in the first chopper and its clones. It's worth getting the new one if you have the old one. Now I put the ties into a piano jig. I made this with a yardstick for the straight edge, which makes it easy to figure out how many ties will fill a space I've measured on the layout. I always cut the tape on the previous segment right next to the last tie. It makes it easier to place the next segment. For straight track, I use full-width masking tape to lift the ties out and position them. If I was doing curves, I would cut the tape to half width to make it easier to bend the strip of ties. After checking the fit, I spread white glue where the ties are going to go. I used to use carpenter's glue, but white glue dries clear so you can still see the track lines easily, which helps when positioning the first rail. The ballast and its glue will also help hold the ties in place, so there's no worry of them moving. I flatten the glue out with my finger so that it won't get on the sides of the ties and prevent the stain from penetrating. Then I put the ties in place and I pat them down into the glue for a good contact. After the glue dries, I'll just peel off the masking tape. Switches are done the same way. I have developed a chart for how many of each length tie I need for the frog angles I use. And I just put them in the same piano jig. I measure how far the glue should go and then put the ties in place. With switch ties, I sort of help the ties out of the jig with one hand while lifting the tape with the other. And here you can see all the ties in place for the yard. I used to sand them with a block, but I decided to try a power sander this time, which saved a lot of time and bumping ties out of place. It's very important to have no bumps from any ties that are too tall or too short. And now we'll vacuum up all the dust we just made. And we're ready to stain the ties. I mixed a whole bottle of brown ink into a pint of rubbing alcohol. Brush it on liberally. You want to saturate the ties. Make sure to get the front edge of the ties. After a few minutes, I go over the ties a second time. They will get lighter over the next few days, so they should look pretty dark at this point. After the stain dries, I'm going to put tie plates in place. This doesn't take as long as I thought it would. I cut the tie plates from styrene strip, 0.010 inches thick and 8 by 14 scale inches. Using tie plates pretty much means you are committed to spiking every tie, and that takes time. I don't pre-drill the plates because the spikes I use are very sharp. Before spiking anything, put the plates approximately in place. I'm going to try to show the spiking of the rail, but it is very hard to figure out where to put the camera so that you can see. I'll move the tie plate into final position, which I would normally do with the pliers straight up. I'm using spikes from Proto 87 shops, and I can't say enough good things about them. They not only look great, but the sharp tip makes them easier to insert than wire spikes. For straight track, I use a gauging tool I turned from brass rod. It is accurate enough for this, but I don't use it in switches. Again, it's easier to put these spikes in if you don't have to keep your hands out of the camera's view, but you can see it's not difficult at all with good pliers and with these spikes. By the way, that is a Xuron plier. With these spikes, I found it easier to use than the micro-mark spiking plier that I used with the wire spikes. So now I just need to insert about 5,000 more spikes and the yard will be ready. The rest of this would be the same if I were using flex track. First I'll paint the sides of the rails. I'm using a micro brush here, but it tends to leave fuzzies caught on the spikes. I think I prefer a regular round brush. Now I'm painting the tie plates. I decided to use black styrene after this. It's really difficult to get the front edge of the white styrene painted. If you get some on the ties, you can scratch it off with a knife. Ballasting is the same as with any track. I pour on what seems like the right amount, and then I spread it with a brush. Then I come back and move individual rocks off the ties. I prefer diluted matte medium, or you can just use diluted white glue. Then I always have to pick off a few more rocks at this point. This is the one and only time that I use any abrasive on the track. This is an 800 grit nail file. After this, I only use plain wooden blocks rubbed on the tops of the rails for cleaning. And finally, we get to put the track in service.